Questions and answers for a world in crisis. Today, we examine anger, its cause, and how to overcome it. In our continuing series of questions and answers from the writings of Sri Aurobindo and the Mother, in this time of planetary crisis. A number of students have submitted questions and difficulties that concern them and impact their lives. We are including them in this series and invite your questions as well. You may write to us at narada12@gmail.com. That is NARADA, the number 12, @gmail.com. Links for further study are supplied at the end of this talk. Today's answers are from Sri Aurobindo. Searching through his voluminous works, we find in many of his letters to disciples his answers to the origin of anger, and especially for those who aspire for a higher life, how to eliminate it when it attempts to enter us. He writes, "Infinite peace, universal love can remove anger if they are complete and stable." He writes to another disciple, "The fact that anger comes with such force is itself enough to show that it is not in you that it is, but that it comes from outside. It is a rush of force from the universal nature that tries to take possession of the individual being and make that being act according to the will of this outside force and not according to the will of the soul within. These things come in the course of the sadhana, because the sadhak is liberating himself from the lower nature and trying to turn towards the Mother and live in her divine consciousness and the higher nature. The forces of the lower nature do not want that, and so they make these rushes in order to recover their rule. It is necessary, when that comes, to remain quiet within, remembering the Mother or calling her, and reject the anger or whatever else comes, whenever it comes, or however often it comes. If that is done, then these forces begin to lose their power to invade. It is easier if one clearly feels them to be outside forces and foreign to oneself. But even if you cannot feel that yet when they enter, still the mind must keep that idea and refuse to accept them as any longer a part of the nature. In fact, all these ignorant, vital movements originate from outside in the ignorant universal nature. The human being forms in his superficial parts of being, mental, vital, physical, a habit of certain responses to these waves from outside. It is these responses that he takes as his own character, anger, desire, sex, etc., and thinks he cannot be otherwise. But that is not so. He can change. There is another consciousness deeper within him, his true inner being, which is his real self, but is covered over by the superficial nature. This the ordinary man does not know, but the yogi becomes aware of it as he progresses in his sadhana. As the consciousness of this inner being increases by sadhana, the surface nature and its responses are pushed out and can be got rid of altogether. Again, he writes in another letter, I think you have always had an idea that to give expression to an impulse or a movement is the best way, or even the only way, to get rid of it. But that is a mistaken idea. If you give expression to anger, you prolong or confirm the habit of the recurrence of anger. You do not diminish or get rid of the habit. The very first step towards weakening the power of anger in the nature, and afterwards getting rid of it altogether, is to refuse all expression to it in act or speech. Afterwards, one can go on with more likelihood of success to throw it out from the thought and feeling also. And so with all other wrong movements. Again, he writes to another disciple, look at it and see how trifling is the occasion of the rising of this anger and its outburst. It becomes more and more causeless, and the absurdity of such movements itself. It would not really be difficult to get rid of it if, when it comes, you looked at it calmly. For it is perfectly possible to stand back in one part of the being, observing in a detached equanimity, even while the anger rises on the surface, as if it were someone else in your being who had the anger. The difficulty is that you get alarmed and upset, and that makes it easier for the thing to get hold of your mind, which it should not do. Again, help we are giving you. Stand back so as to be able to feel it, and not this obsession of these surface movements. And again, it is true that anger and strife are in the nature of the human vital and do not go easily. But what is important is to have the will to change and the clear perception that these things must go. If that will and perception are there, then in the end they will go. The most important help to it is, here also, for the psychic being to grow within. For that brings a certain kindliness, patience, charity towards all, and one no longer regards everything from the point of view of one's own ego and its pain or pleasure, likings and dislikings. The second help is the growth of the inner peace, which outward things cannot trouble. With the peace comes a calm wideness, in which one perceives all as oneself, all beings as the children of the mother, and the mother dwelling in oneself and in all. It is that towards which your sadhana will move. For these are the things which come with the growth of the psychic and spiritual consciousness. Then these troubled reactions to outward things will no longer come. And again. It is indeed when the quietude comes down from above or comes out from the psychic that the vital becomes full of peace or of kindliness and goodwill. It is therefore that the inner psychic, quietude first and afterwards the peace from above, must occupy the whole being. Otherwise, such things as anger in the vital can be controlled, but it is difficult to get rid of them altogether without this occupation by the inner quietude and higher peace. Again, these things, hard forms of speech, anger, etc., are habits formed by the vital physical consciousness, and as they are supported by the subconscious, very difficult to change. If one can conquer or change them by force of will, or mental or spiritual control, so much the better. But if one cannot do this at once, one must not be upset or think oneself unfit. It is easier for most to realize the divine or enter into the psychic consciousness than to change this part of the nature. But once the psychic consciousness governs, or the higher consciousness descends, then it is much easier for these to go. You must not, therefore, be discouraged by these recurrences or persistences, but try always to stand back in an inner quietude, and if they come, let them pass away like a cloud across the light. In time, these things will be finally dealt with by the force. Another letter. That is the right thing that must happen always when anger or anything else rises. The psychic reply must become habitual, pointing out that anger is neither right nor helpful. And then the being must draw back from these outward things and take its stand in its inner self. Detach from all these things and people. It is this detachment that is the first thing that must be gained by the sadhak. He must cease to live in these outward things and live in his inner being. The more that is done, the more there is a release and peacefulness. Afterwards, when one is secure in this inner being, the right thing to do, the right way to deal with men and things will begin to come. Another letter. I have never said that to overcome doubt is easy. It is difficult because it is the nature of something in the human physical mind to cling to doubt for its own sake. It is not easy to overcome gloom, depression, grief, and suffering because something in the human vital clings to it and almost needs it as part of the drama of life. So also I have never said that sex, anger, jealousy, etc. were easy to overcome. I have said it was difficult because they were ingrained in the human vital, and even if thrown out, were always being brought into it, either by its own habit or by the invasion of the general nature and the resurgence of its old response. Again, to another disciple, what you have noticed about the disturbance is true. There are now two consciousnesses in you, the new one that is growing and what is left of the old. The old has something in it which is a habit of the human vital. The tendency to keep any touch of grief, anger, vexation, etc., or any kind of emotional, vital, or mental disturbance, to make much of it, to prolong it, not to wish to let it go, to return to it even when the cause of disturbance is past and could be forgotten, always to remember and bring it up when it can. This is a common trait of human nature and a quite customary movement. The new consciousness, on the contrary, does not want these things, and when they happen, throws them off as quickly as possible. When the new consciousness is fully grown and established, then the disturbances will be altogether rejected. Even if the causes of them happen, there will be no response of grief, anger, vexation, etc. in the nature. And lastly, you should throw away fear as well as anger and go quietly on your way, putting your confidence in the Mother. You are welcome to visit our website, motherandshriaurobindo.in. Thank you.